Hello. We are so excited to be here today with you to help you with your child with anxiety. And we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves and then move into giving you some skills on how to help your child with anxiety. So I'm Kimberly Morrow. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been helping people live well with anxiety for like 35 years. And I'm just really passionate about that. I really believe that if we can skill up kids and parents, that it can go a long way to help children live well with anxiety. So we're hoping that we can do that with you today. I also just want to acknowledge that I'm a parent, and I think one of the most anxiety-provoking experiences I've had is parenting. I think it's so hard to know if you're making the right decision and you're being helpful or harmful to your child. And so I just want to validate that if you're here listening to us today, I get your anxiety, and I know it can be a really confusing place to be. I hope today helps you be a little less confused.
And I'm Elizabeth DuPont Spencer. Kimberly and I are business partners and colleagues, both working in the anxiety field, both the same amount of time, 30 plus years in the field. And then together, we also have this business, anxietytraining.com. I am in Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., and Kimberly is in Erie, Pennsylvania. So we see a broad reach of people over the country struggling with anxiety, and parents are really, really having a lot of difficulty. Like Kimberly, I'm also a parent. And wow, I remember a couple moments as parents, even though I was an expert with dealing with anxiety, where it just felt really overwhelming to me. So thank you for taking the time and joining us today. And I hope we have some things to say that are going to be useful to you immediately in your life with your kids.
Yeah, I'm going to just tell a quick story about that what you literally just said, because I had a daughter with asthma, and I can remember she was struggling, and I was sure it was panic, and my husband was sure it was her asthma. And ultimately, I decided, yes, let's bring her into the hospital, and they evaluated her, and they're like, oh, she's just having a panic attack. And then they handed me a resource sheet because I'm the expert in Erie on helping children with panic attacks and anybody with panic attacks. And they handed me a resource sheet to say, here, you might want to educate yourself about anxiety. And it was literally the resource sheet that I had written for them. So just goes to how confusing it is to know, right?
And sometimes impossible. Sometimes
Yeah.
impossible to know. Sometimes we have to go get more information. That's the way it works with anxiety. So
Yeah.
so why are we talking about this particularly right now? Well, you can see here on the slide that the statistics are bearing out what all of us are experiencing in our lives, which is that anxiety is really exploding. There are just so many more children than ever who are experiencing anxiety, and they can be experiencing anxiety disorders, and they can be experiencing just anxiety in general, not the full-blown disorder. And we're really speaking to both of this today. But there's just so much suffering that's going on right now. I wanted to share a couple stories from my practice. I think about a kid that I worked with who was 8 years old, and he was he loved playing soccer, and yet he was extremely afraid of storms. And again, remember, I said that I live in Washington, D.C. And one thing that happens in Washington, D.C. pretty regularly in the summer is we get storms. And he was terrified of storms. And the more that his parents reassured him, the more his parents made sure they checked the weather app, the more his parents said to him, it's okay, it's okay, the more time the kid spent hiding in the basement and not going to soccer practice. What did those parents end up doing? What happened with this kid? I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this. And then I also think about a 16-year-old that I worked with who was a straight A student in high school. She was in an honors English class and had to give a presentation that was a fairly substantial presentation, nothing like she'd ever done before. And she was so anxious about this that she missed an entire week of school, which for her was that just never happened, for her to miss an entire week of school. And these are the kind of experiences that you as parents have. So we got Kimberly's story, and we've got these stories of the kids. These are the things that happen for parents and kids with anxiety.
Yeah. And so I just want to talk about changing kind of what we believe about what our kids are capable of, because I think anxiety can really suck us all in and, make us uncertain about, well, maybe I should be helping them. Maybe they can't handle this. Isn't it reasonable for me to take these steps to help smooth their path out? So I think that can be really confusing. And there's a really great book called The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, that where they actually research like what has happened to our children and young adults where they're no longer capable of handling big emotions and difficult things in their life. And they came to three really important pieces, I think, for all of us to consider. One is the idea of fragility. The myth is that I can't handle doing hard things. How often do we hear ourselves or our children say, I can't do it, I can't handle this, this is too hard, right? The truth is, we are all capable of doing hard things, but we have to do the hard things to find out. I can't tell you how often in my practice I am helping children and parents and adults lean into doing hard things, and then on the other side saying, oh my gosh, that was so much better than I was thinking it was going to be. Because our anticipatory anxiety, the anxiety we feel before we do a hard thing, is often so strong that it convinces us not to even try. So it's really important that as parents that you come back to believing that your kids are capable of doing hard things, okay? And that they're going to have to actually do those things to discover that themselves. Then we have emotional reasoning. A lot of times, all of us think that if we feel it, we should respond to it, right? If we feel something really uncomfortable, then we have to get away from that feeling or we have to do something to make it better. The truth is that feelings pass on their own if we do nothing. I can't tell you how powerful a message that is, right? That feelings pass on their own if we do nothing. Most people don't know that because they respond immediately. When something stressful happens in life and we get a big feeling about it, our instinct is to urgently do something to make that better, whether it's for our children or even for ourselves, right? The truth is, if we just rode the wave of that discomfort, it would pass on its own. And if we just move on to doing what we were going to do in the first place, it doesn't take that long. It can take anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, and our brain says, "Oh, I guess we can handle this thing." So remember, when you're helping your kids and giving them really good information, it's important that they understand that even though this feels really bad, that it will pass on its own if they can just get back to doing what's important. And then this idea of the us versus them mentality, which we see a lot now, particularly in politics, right? And in challenging what people believe. So the myth is if we don't agree, then they are wrong. And the truth is that being able to be flexible, both in how we think about things and how we respond to things, is actually the key to living well with anxiety or any stressful experience. It's also the key to living well with each other. So if you can help your children be more flexible, meaning both in how they think about things and how they respond to people, it will really go a long way to helping them manage their big emotions like anxiety and also be in healthier relationships.
Yeah. These are just such great keys, those three great untruths. Now, before we go further, we want to really make sure that we're clear about the fact that anxiety is important. So we don't want to ever be in a position where we're talking about anxiety in a way like we're suggesting that there is some problem with anxiety or anxiety is bad in some way. Because anxiety, of course, is important. It's a normal, helpful emotion. It reminds kids to do their homework, brush their teeth. For the kids that I was talking about, it reminded could have, if it had been healthy anxiety, reminded the 8-year-old to go to soccer practice and pay attention because that was what was important to him. It could have reminded the 16-year-old to practice her doing her presentation, right? Those would be normal, healthy experiences with anxiety. But it's how we respond to the feeling that anxiety creates that's the problem. Because what happened with those two examples that I was talking about? Well, the kids were so overwhelmed by their anxiety that what they did was avoid. They just did less and less about whatever the thing was, going to soccer practice in terms of being around a storm or doing anything that had anything to do with the presentation. So anxiety itself, again, it taps us on the shoulder and says, hey, hey, remember, you need to do this thing. You can't just have fun. You can't just do whatever it is that you would like to do. You need to do hard things. But when it gets to be too much, what we see is kids and adults as well avoiding more, doing less, having less experiences of the whole thing. And we really have to work on recalibrating at that point so we can get back on track and do the right thing and not have anxiety running the whole show the way it so typically happens with anxiety problems. And part of the thing we want to understand in this has to do with our brain and this basic brain biology that's going on that's dictating what happens with anxiety. Because again, anxiety is normal and helpful, right? And the part of our brain that's particularly associated with anxiety is the amygdala. And the amygdala is where we learn, have a fear response to something. Hey, this is dangerous, watch out, this is new. And it gets us to be alert and pay attention, which is great if the thing is actually something that we need to pay attention to. But it sets off that whole alarm in our body, and that just feels really yucky, right? We get that pulses racing and our stomach might be upset. We're really, really attending to what the signal is of the anxiety at that point. And again, it's helpful in certain situations, but when we're talking about going to soccer practice with a few clouds in the sky, we can see how that isn't serving us well. And the other part of the brain that really plays a part of this is the prefrontal cortex. This is the front of our brain where we think things through and we have attribution of meaning. And that part of our brain can really send messages to the amygdala. We think about it as what tells the story of what's going on, the story we're telling ourselves, and we send that story to the amygdala. What's the story we're sending if we're avoiding soccer practice? Oh my gosh, it could be dangerous. I could be struck by lightning, was the story that this boy was sending, right? And that then gets us to do more of the avoiding. So we really need to think about, as parents, what is it that our kid is experiencing, and understand that what happens with the amygdala is just automatic. They can't stop that. That's going to happen. But it's what that story is. We've got to really think about what we do and how we respond to this so that we can, as I said, recalibrate what's going on with our brain.
Can I just add one quick piece to that? You know, when our amygdala gets activated, it dumps these chemicals to wake us up to the potential danger and to get us to run away or fight the danger. And as Elizabeth said, that feels really yucky to us. I just want you as parents to know that those chemicals are not dangerous to you or your child, okay? They are not going to die or go crazy. You know, they might have to go to the bathroom a lot because they just got a bunch of chemicals dumped into their gut, right? They might get a headache, but even having a headache or going to the bathroom a lot isn't a reason to keep them home. The more they can move into their life and their amygdala realizes that they're not in danger, the less chemicals that will get dumped, and their stomach and their head will actually begin to feel better. So I think it's just really important that all you know that it isn't dangerous when you get that chemical dump, okay? So you might be asking, so then what do we do, right? How do we respond to it? And again, I think it's important for you to be able to help your children discern the difference between scary discomfort versus scary danger. Your younger kids are just going to say, I'm scared, right? And they don't know the difference. They're just responding to their amygdala because it sent that glitchy message, dumped a bunch of chemicals into them, and it gives them that scary feeling. It doesn't occur to them that there's a difference between scary discomfort and scary danger. And so I bet you're all wondering, what is the difference between scary discomfort and scary danger? So scary danger is when there's actual evidence, direct evidence in the here and now that something dangerous is happening, right? So if that boy was out on the soccer field and a storm came in and it started to rain and they heard thunder in the background, now that's reasonable for him to feel scared and for him to leave the soccer field, right? But when he's at home and there's no information about there being a storm coming, but he sees a cloud, that cloud is just something that's making him uncomfortable. It's activating his glitchy message in the amygdala. So there isn't direct evidence in the here and now that he's in danger. So it's really helpful as parents to be able to say, I understand that you're scared. Is there anything in the here and now that that tells us that we need to do something about this because you're in danger? Or is this just a message that you really do need to get to practicing your presentation, like that teenager that Elizabeth was talking about? Okay, so being able to acknowledge that your child's amygdala got activated activated, they have a dump of chemicals in them, and then pausing to help their prefrontal cortex, their wise mind, think for a minute. Like, am I actually in danger, or is this just uncomfortable? Is school actually a dangerous place? Well, if it were, everybody wouldn't be going to school, right? So sometimes I would say to kids, look around you. If you're having a panic attack, what's everybody else doing? If everybody else is listening to the teacher or putting their head down and closing their eyes, then clearly there's nothing actually dangerous going on. Your brain just was glitchy. And the best thing you can do is to stay and teach your brain that there isn't anything dangerous going on here. Okay. So we want to help our child realize that these distressing sensations pass. Remember when we talk about that, that they don't have to do anything. Now, you're probably all hoping that we're going to give you a bunch of things your children can do to feel better from their anxiety. I think Elizabeth and I want to really highlight that there isn't anything they need to do. And in some cases, trying to give them something to do, if any of you parents have already tried that, like just take a few deep breaths. What have your children said? Elizabeth, you want to, what does a child typically say when in the
Doesn't
mid?
work.
Yes.
I tried that already.
Yeah, I still have to go to the bathroom, or I'm still panicking, or I still have a headache, or whatever, right? So trying to do something to make them feel better rarely is helpful, okay? They just have to practice riding the wave of that distress, okay? There are some things that, if you just have a highly anxious child, there are things that they can do proactively, like breathing with a longer exhale, before they go to school or before they take a test, or, doing yoga or meditation or exercising consistently. All of those things help our brain and body manage anxiety better. But doing those things in response to a chemical dump from a glitchy amygdala typically actually ends up working against all of you. So that's why Elizabeth and I are not focusing on that today. Okay. And then the last thing I want to say is, Elizabeth talked about the prefrontal cortex, and it's what we are saying to our amygdala that our amygdala says, okay, is this dangerous or isn't this dangerous? So when kids are saying, oh my God, I can't handle this. This sucks. I'm thinking about a girl that I have that has a fear of vomiting. And when she was in school this week and someone vomited next to her, of course, right? And I said to her, well, what were you thinking? And she is like, oh my God, this sucks so bad. I can't handle this. I don't want to go to school anymore because people are just going to vomit. So do you see all those thoughts that she was thinking actually kept telling her amygdala that she was in danger? And so it's really important that you sit down and help your kids come up with some brave statements, some ways to respond when that happens. And something like it might be like, even though this is really hard and I really don't like to vomit, I can handle it. And I know I can handle it because I'm sitting here handling it right now. I don't like it. It doesn't feel good, but I can stay. So anything where you can help your child find a way to validate that they're not happy, that this doesn't feel good, that they are worried about a storm coming, but that they can continue to do the thing they value, even though they feel that feeling.
Yeah. And I want to chime in here with one thing, Kimberly, because again, I think one of the things that can be so hard to parents when we say, we're not offering you something you can do with your child right now to help them feel better. It can feel, right? We as parents are designed to want to do something to help our child feel better. I mean, that's the way we're designed. And I know you're going to speak more to that. But one of the things to recognize as parents is the longer we avoid something for any of us, the more suffering that we have during that time, right? It's just amazing how long. Like, think about that boy. He didn't go to soccer practice. He was suffering all that time. Whereas if he'd gone to soccer practice, he could have learned something new, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's very important. So sometimes I think that when somebody just hears us speaking for the first time, and it can come across as I don't know, unrealistic, maybe unsympathetic. And I think that what you hear is the experience of two people who've been in this field for decades and realize that the suffering intensifies the more you don't turn around and face whatever it is that's the triggering topic. Anyway, Kimberly.
And there's so much we could talk about. A half hour isn't enough, but I just want to acknowledge that, if this is the first time you're hearing this and your child, you go home tonight and your child is falling apart because they can't do their homework and they're having all kinds of anxiety, being able to change how you all do this probably isn't going to happen in that moment. So you're probably just going to do what you normally do to help them feel better. But then we would suggest that when you're on the other side of it, to sit down and say, hey, I learned some things today. And I think it's really important that your dad and I or your mom and I begin to respond differently, and that you learn how to respond differently so that you can get back to what you really enjoy doing and your brain begins to calm down. So that is, you're going to find, slow ways to get back into the thing they value, and you're going to change how you talk to the child, and they're going to change how they talk to the amygdala. So that's just kind of reviewing what we just went over. So here's an example of probably what you are doing. And Elizabeth and I, hey, listen, we are experts in the field, and I can promise you that both of us have been in this cycle. But I think it just helps to see what the cycle is and why it isn't helpful. So if you start at the top where it says there's distress related to the disorder, and what we mean is anxiety, right? So your child feels anxious. And in this particular example, the child says to the parent, let's say it's morning time, everyone's really, in a rush to get out the door and get to school and work. And they left their backpack up in their bedroom, and they're like, Mom, I'm too scared to go alone to get up my backpack. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have time for this. So what do? You do the reasonable thing. You go up and you help your child get the backpack, right? So then there's some short-term reduction to stress. And everyone's like, cool, this was helpful. We can get out the door, right? The child gets his backpack and gets to school on time. Everyone's feeling some relief. Unfortunately, that just creates continued dependence on you for their emotional regulation. What their amygdala learned is that they can't handle those feelings and do it themselves. So the next time they leave their backpack in the bedroom, their amygdala is going to say, remember, you can't do this by yourself. So the child learns the only way I can get things from another room is if my parents come with me. We now have a maintenance of the symptoms, and the parents continue to accommodate the child, and the child continues to avoid, and round we go. But as Elizabeth also talked about, this is how it starts, but then it grows exponentially and it takes over more and more. Your child believes less and less in their ability to do hard things. And we want your child to believe they can handle these feelings and do hard things.
So we like to think about this, whatever we give attention to grows. So we give attention to that cloud out there, that might be a storm. We can tell ourselves an incredible story about that cloud. And what is anxiety doing about then? It is hijacking a person's entire life to make it about the cloud when there's all kinds of other things that are going on. So this picture, what we've done is, if you'll notice on this picture, in a very small bit, is on his knee, there's a Band-Aid. Okay, so what we're thinking of here with this story is this child fell down, got hurt, and put a Band-Aid on. And instead of putting a lot of attention into whatever happened that is now gotten so that he needs a Band-Aid, he is saying to himself, I have a banged up knee. Oh, well, I'm going to be brave and do my thing anyway. And one of the reasons that I like this as an example is I think this is an experience that many of us have as parents. We have the experience of our kids getting some kind of boo-boo, especially when they're small, giving them a kiss, putting a Band-Aid on it, and helping the kid get back up and doing things again. And really, that is what we're doing, in a sense, with anxiety. Yes, it's about more complicated topics as the kid gets older. That's the way anxiety is. Anxiety only comes after the things that are, where developmentally we're vulnerable. The thing that matters the most to us, that 8-year-old, soccer was his whole world. You should have seen his bedroom, posters of his stars, right? And yet, that is where what anxiety comes after us, because that's what matters to us. We can't worry about things that don't matter to us. But as parents, again, we can work on helping our kids realize soccer is important to me. I am here on this field with other people, including adults, who all have a plan for if there is a storm. Because again, in Washington, because we have storms so often, there is always a plan. The plan might be we're going to all go sit in parents' cars. I mean, I'm not saying that the plan is some going to a tornado shelter, but there is a plan in place of what to do. And we've got to recognize that my anxiety is giving me wrong messages and it's keeping me too far from what I really value. A lot of big words, not what we want to impart as parents, but what you want to understand that you're doing by showing them the confidence in being able to suggest to them that they can do this. The 16-year-old who had the fear of giving a presentation, what she needed to do was practice giving the presentation. She needed to practice giving it to her parents and then go into school. And obviously her teacher knew this had been a huge problem for her. And so her teacher had her give the presentation to just the teacher alone in the classroom, just the teacher, before she gave it to the whole class, right? So we can take small steps. We don't have to move directly into the whole thing, depending on what the situation is. But we need to start moving towards it and giving our attention to the rest of our life and not just the thing that has blown way out of proportion because of anxiety.
And I imagine, Elizabeth, that story, I imagine that teenage girl felt anxious when she did those things, right? Our goal is not to have our kids not feel anxiety. Our goal is for us to have our kids feel anxiety and do the important thing anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, there's lots of things that parents say to their child. You're fine. Don't worry about it. You'll do terrific. All these things in an attempt to help them feel better. But there's actually just one statement that really makes a difference with anxiety. And that is your ability to accept and validate that they have this big feeling and add confidence that they can feel that feeling and do the hard thing. So what that looks like is, I can see that this is really hard for you, and I'm 100% sure that you can handle it. Or I can see that you're feeling really worried about eating in the lunchroom, and I am confident that you're going to be able to do it. And I can't wait to hear, what happened in the lunchroom. It's important that we don't let kids think that, oh, because they do the hard thing, then everything goes well, right? Sometimes things don't go well, but if it doesn't, we'll handle that when that actually happens, rather than avoiding going to the lunchroom because we're afraid somebody might tease us, or, I might get a stomach ache, whatever that looks like. So I can see that this is making you really worried or anxious, or this is really hard for you, and I am confident that you can handle it. And we'll talk about what actually happened when you come home.
Right. Right. Love that statement. And that's why we have really highlighted that. And I want you to really hold on to that as parents, because again, sometimes we just need a blueprint. What is it that we're supposed to say in this moment? Because the moments are so different and they come at us so unpredictably, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to just add to that too, because our kids look to us for feedback, right? And if we're reassuring them and accommodating them, the silent message we're giving them is, we also are afraid. We also don't believe you can handle this. It's really important that they hear from us and that we believe it, that we're confident that they can handle it. I had a 8-year-old girl who was really struggling with anxiety, and her and I went for a walk for a session, and I said, you got to help me. I said, I'm not, I've taught you all the skills, I've taught your parents the skills, and yet you're still struggling. Why do you think you're still struggling? And she said the most wise thing. She said, Kimberly, I think my parents are as afraid of my anxiety as I am. I was
Wow.
like, oh. And so I said to her, could we go back into my office and could you share that with them? It literally was the turning point, because now her parents realized that they actually had to believe and act on that they believed she could handle that and not be afraid of it showing up in their home.
Wow. It's just, when everybody gets on the same team, it's so different. It's
Yeah.
such a different experience. And it doesn't mean that anxiety is easy. It's not easy. It's hard. This is hard work, but it's manageable because you're all working together and you all understand what's going on. So we have some resources here for you, because again, we know this is just a short presentation, and we don't know where you are in your journey with dealing with anxiety, and whether you're dealing with a child who has a little anxiety or a big problem with anxiety, but we want to make sure you know that there's lots of more resources available to you, including if you want more from us. If you have enjoyed spending this time with us, if you would like to spend more time with us, we have more resources. So we have a program called Anxiety Training for Schools. And we have a program for individuals who have anxiety called Mastering Anxiety. You can find more about both of those on our website, anxietytraining.com. And we would love to be part of helping you and your community or your school do better with anxiety if you would like more from us. Now, of course, there are tons of other resources and other places you can turn. We've got a couple books to suggest to you. And of course, the Anxiety and Depression Association of America has loads and loads of resources available to you. We particularly like this YouTube videos by Natasha Daniels for parents and kids as well. So in closing, we really want to say that children can get well, feel less anxious, and get back to enjoying life. And I want to tell you a little story from my experience as a parent. I'm telling this in a condensed version in the interest of time, but it is a story of victory, even though there was a moment there that is indelibly inscribed in my brain as a parent because it was so hard. My son, who at the time was 9 years old, had been swimming during the summer in our community summer swim program and loved it, and had asked to join a winter swim program, which is common in our area to do that. And he was very excited to be able to join and was looking forward to being with his friends again because he went to a different school than some of his best friends on the team. So I signed him up, happy to do that. Always like to have the kids have an after school activity during the school year. So that's great. And the summer swim program, if you think about the way it ends, sort of ends, and then there's a little break before the fall program starts. And so now it's a few weeks later, not long, but he's 9 and this program's starting. And I drove him over to his first day of swim practice. And the whole way he's kind of quiet and does not seem excited the way he was before. And as we get closer, he says, I don't want to do it. This was a mistake. I don't want to do it. I never wanted to do it. Anyway, you can imagine, because if you're a parent, you've been through these kinds of conversations. No, I'm not going to do it. No, you can't make me. I refuse. This is impossible. Why did you even think I wanted to do this? You didn't understand me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We got to the place. And I parked the car and I turned around, he's in the back seat, and I said to him, I don't know if you're going to like swimming or if you're not going to like swimming, but there is one thing I know, considering the kind of work that I do and knowing you as a person and knowing myself as a person, and that is we are not leaving here without you going into swim practice. And so that's what we are going to do. You have a choice about how we do this. You can go with me. I will hold your hand and we can walk in together, or you can go on your own, but we are not leaving here without you going to swim practice. And he stared at me, and I'll never forget, it gives me chills remembering the pure hatred in his eyes. And he said, I hate you, Mom. And he got out of the car and he slammed the door and he stormed over and opened the door and went in. And I sat there kind of shaking, literally shaking, tears in my eyes. And about 10 minutes later, I got out and I walked over and I just opened the door to look in. And of course, what did I find? There he was with his friends, having a tremendously great time, enjoying swim practice. When I picked him up, like, we never discussed that ever again, because it, for him, almost hadn't happened, which is bizarre because it's so intense for me. And my son went on to swim all during high school, and he was a all-American water polo player in college. Like, if he had not gotten out of that car that day, if I hadn't known what I had known that day, I don't know if any of that would have happened. Like, again, this just gives me chills in that moment that I had that choice of what we were going to do. And because I knew what I knew, we did it. But so it can have really, really great experiences if you can just step up in the moment that anxiety hits you and move on with your life.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks to why we did this talk for all of you, because we often are focused on kids with anxiety and helping them skill up and helping them be brave, but it really takes a parent to be brave like that in order for a child to be successful. So we are all encouraging you all to really take the information we gave you today and to be brave yourselves and to sit down with your kids and have a different plan on how you're going to handle anxiety when it shows up in your home.
Yes. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope that you've taken some information from this that's helpful to you in the future. Best of luck to you and your kids.